Okay, everybody. Thank you so much. I can see that we've got a high number of attendances here. So thank you very, very much. And I'm just promoting Miguel Jordan, who's one of our fabulous Prime Access INS people. He will become a person that will hopefully help me with all the questions. So I'm absolutely super excited to welcome you all here to this webinar today. We have interpreting the future, but there'll be no crystal balls involved in this process whatsoever. But we've got perspectives from leaders in the interpreting and translating industry. And we have Vesna here, and I'm going to get each one of them to introduce. We have Tia and we have Karine. So I'm going to introduce Vesna first off. So Vesna, if you would like to tell us a bit about yourself.
Okay, well, I'll tell you about, so first of all, my name is Vesna Dragoje. I'm the Director of the Sydney Healthcare Interpreter Service for Sydney Local Health District. I'm based here at Camperdown, and the reason that is important is because this is where the very first healthcare interpreter service was established 43 years ago. Today I am representing my colleagues, so there are 5 healthcare interpreter services in the state, and I'm representing all of those. So today I'll be speaking about our collective experience and some of our collective data. And the reason that I think that is important, so this is part of the introduction, is because New South Wales Health is one of the largest healthcare systems in Australia, but also in the world. New South Wales Health operates more than 230 public hospitals, as well as providing community health and other public health services through a network of 15 local health districts, 3 specialty networks, and non-government affiliated health organisations. And the reason that this is important as part of my introduction is because within this structure, this marvellous structure, there are 5 healthcare interpreter services, and we service every single public health setting across all of New South Wales Health. So, and I think that's extremely important. So that's my introduction.
That's excellent. And I have to say you would be rather busy, Vesna. Cool. So, we've. I have to say, our last webinar we had Victoria well represented. This webinar we've got New South Wales. We'll have to get somebody from Queensland next webinar. I would love to introduce Tia from TM, the CEO of TM. So would you like to open up, Tia, and with something about yourself?
Sure. Thank you very much, Karen. Fabulous to be here, and thanks again for facilitating this communication of our industry. So my name is Dietterich. I'm the CEO of 2M Language Service. And 2M Language Services is an international language service provider with head office in Brisbane and offices in Melbourne, Paris, Manila, Cordoba in Argentina, and we just opened one in Chile, in Santiago de Chile. So I'm the CEO, and I also am a NATI certified interpreter and translator in my own right. And actually, I'm an OSIT member, and I've been an OSIT member for 20 years. So I'm still an OSIT member and senior practitioner. So my heart always goes out, of course, to my fellow colleagues. I have a great interest in international trade and diplomacy, and I'm a board director of the German-Australian Chamber of Industry and Commerce. I'm also a board director of ABI France, which is Australian Business in Europe, the equivalent in Europe of the French-Australian Chamber of Industry and Commerce. I also sit on the NATI track, which is the Technical Reference Advisory Committee, advising the NATI board on the technical aspects, and the NATI Regional Advisory Committee. So yeah, it's fantastic to be here, and thanks again for having me.
Absolute pleasure. I have to say, I think you're one of the busiest women I know. I kind of got dizzy with all the things that you're working with there, and it's such an honor to have you. And last but not least is Karine.
Yes, hello. So my name is Karine Bachelier, and thank you for having me. So I now work for 2M with Tia. Previously, I started in this industry. I'm a conference interpreter and translator, NATI certified, and I've been a member of OSIT for the past 8 years, if I'm not mistaken. I come from New Caledonia, where I used to work full-time as a conference interpreter and official translator for the government of New Caledonia, for the presidency, and for our different departments. And I was based within the translation and interpreting section of the SPC, the Pacific Community, which is based in New Caledonia. Mm-hmm. And so this gives I know quite a bit about the Pacific and its regions. I'm quite passionate about that. And then into 2017, I decided on a change of course and to come back to Australia, where I was born, and to settle in Melbourne. And so I worked as a trainer and as a freelancer, still as a conference interpreter and translator. I love this industry. I love my job. Yeah. And here I am today with you.
Excellent. And it's so good to have you. And I have to say, you, for all the industries, because we're obviously a software company, for all the industries that we've ever come across, this is our favorite industry, because you are passionate people who have got so much drive and so much energy. So we're really happy to be working with you all. So we're going to kick it off with some questions. So we've got Vesna. Again, there's lots of different health and interpretive services with health in all the different states. But we have to say that your business model for the your health interpreter service in New South Wales is slightly different to some of the other states. Would you like to talk about that?
So the New South Wales Healthcare Interpreter Service model is a unique model and structure, not only in Australia, but in the world as well. So, as I said, there are 5 healthcare interpreter services. There's our service, which sits within Sydney Local Health District. We've got Western Sydney Local Health District, Southwestern Sydney, Hunter New England, and Illawarra Shoalhaven. And so between the 5 of us, as I said, we cover the state. This year we celebrate 43 years of operations. I'm going to do this. I'm going to plug a book that we wrote and published on the history of the healthcare interpreter, New South Wales Healthcare Interpreter Services, 3 years ago, actually, to celebrate our 40th anniversary. So basically, we work in partnership with all of our stakeholders to ensure that health services are able to deliver a responsive, equitable, and quality care for our culturally and linguistically diverse and deaf populations within New South Wales that are accessing public health services. Now, because we are unique, I think it's really important here. I'd like to give you just a tiny bit of a background about our history and how we started. So as we all know, back in the 60s and 70s, with the change in migration patterns, politicians started discussing issues around immigrants, language, as well as education. So there's a short example that I'd like to give you from a speech given by Al Grasby at the time, who was a minister for immigration. He was also a staunch supporter of multiculturalism. He was talking at a conference the conference was Country Towns and Country Doctors Conference. And he basically there spoke about the inadequacies of communication in the mental health setting and gave a number of examples of where people were certified and placed in mental institutions solely because of a language barrier.
Oh, wow.
So this isn't that far ago. We're talking about the mid-70s, well, early 70s. Now, we also all know of all those examples where we had hospital cleaners and children that were used to interpret for patients and for parents. I'm not going to speak about that here at this webinar because I think that the majority of our audience already know these stories. But I think that what we also all understand now are the liabilities and problems, not to mention the traumas that came from that practice.
Yeah.
So there were many discussions that led to, so with this example from Al Grasby and the early discussions about language and migrants and immigrants and language issues, There were many discussions then that followed by doctors, sociologists, and especially mental health experts, who then lobbied the government for professional interpreters. So in 1972, the Health Commission of New South Wales began looking at the problems that were arising from the difficulties of barriers in communication within the health sector. The Commission then created a number of positions, and I'm not going to go into that, but you can read about it in our book, about all the wonderful people that started this service. But the Commission then created positions and an environment that enabled the development of a health education program for migrants, hoping to, as a starting point. 1975 was a very important year because that year a woman by the name of Lizette Engel, who is now Lizette Pollack, stepped into the position of a health education officer. And the reason that she is important to all of us, I think, to our profession particularly, so she was an interpreter, very much like the rest of us, an interpreter, translator, very passionate about her calling. But as a health education officer, she had the opportunity, I guess, to have discussions with medical directors and with people in positions at the time. And at one of these particular meetings, she was speaking, she had a meeting with the medical director of Paddington's Royal Hospital for Women, again in Sydney. And this is, at this meeting, Lizette coined the term healthcare interpreter. So after that, Lizette, in 1976, as a coordinator, welcomed the first 4 healthcare interpreters into metropolitan Sydney. And it was a year after that that there was an additional 18 interpreters that had joined the service, with Lizette still being the coordinator. By 1980, the interpreters, so that's the initial service started here. So it started at Surrey Hills in Crown Street, so which is one of my responsibilities. But then in 1980, the interpreter services were extended to the entire Sydney and Metropolitan, Hunter and Illawarra regions. And in 1995, New South Wales Health provided enhancement funding for Hunter, New England and Illawarra Shoalhaven to establish healthcare interpreter services in rural and regional New South Wales. So today we cover the entirety of the state. We all sit within our own local health districts. We report to those local health districts, but we also report to New South Wales Health. We provide interpreting and translating services 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. Total, we have 186 staff interpreters, and together we have a panel of sessional interpreters that number about 1,389. I say it's about, but that's an exact number there. These sessional interpreters are employed by our districts. And in the last financial year, we provided over 600,000 occasions of service. Now, part of your question initially was, what are the challenges and benefits? Now, there are no challenges being part of this new structure, but the benefits are enormous. The benefits include visibility and acknowledgement within our services by our executives and within New South Wales Health, the partnerships, the collaboration, our policies and procedural guidance, as well as our governance framework. So I think those are extremely important support networks to have in an industry like ours, where many of our, many of our interpreters, many of the service providers don't necessarily have all of those support networks. You know, to be supported by such an organisation like New South Wales Health is just enormous. So I think I'll leave it there for now. And then, well, there's one other thing that I do need to include there, and I'm sorry. Within New South Wales Health, New South Wales Health has a policy directive that mandates engagement of professional interpreters in all clinical settings. And it also describes to health professionals how and when to work with professional interpreters to support safe, effective, and clear communication between health staff and patients, carers, and families. And I think that policy directive is important because most states, I don't believe, have a document like that.
I have to tell you, when we first started with IMS, we were looking around, are there policies, especially within health, you know, do people have to use interpreters? So we were fairly new to it all. And that I found the New South Wales statement that there must be a professional interpreter. I went, there you go. So it was the clearest of Google. Google brought it up for me. So I have to say there's a very, very clear directive there, and it's specifically so bravo to New South Wales Health for supporting you. And so you have a lot of interpreters that you are managing, which is, as I said, is a slightly different. You don't necessarily outsource. You have all those interpreters, which is amazing. So thank you, Vesna. Go. Yeah.
No, that's fine. I'm sure I'll get a chance to.
Yes.
Say more.
Yeah. So okay. So moving, we've got with Tia, you're the CEO, and I have to say, you have a sort of a strong focus in different sort of areas within Australia and overseas, with different industries. So would you just like to tell us a little bit about the areas that you specialize in, perhaps? Although you're very, you cover everything, but you do have a speciality.
Sure, thank you. Can I just first appreciate again to be here in this room with Vesna. Wasn't this extraordinary, what we just heard? And to have, strong governance framework as well, as you said, it really shines through. You can tell that, your organization is a purpose-led organization that really came through. And this is extraordinary because this is very important, for all of us, right? Segue obviously into 2M language services where, social performance is a very big, aspect of everything what we do, and purpose, of course, purpose driven throughout. You asked for the specialty. So 2M Language Services, as we heard before, is a language service provider, and we do translate into over 265 languages. This is translation, this is captioning, voiceover, subtitling. It is conference interpreting, which is my background, as a matter of fact, and in good company here with Karine, my colleague, as in simultaneous interpreting, as well as community interpreting. And so, as I always say, technology is the single most economic driver of the future. I understood that many years ago. And so I have researched and really been a thought leader in this region for language technology, natural language processing, neural machine translation engines, and technology advances in the interpreting and translation field. I, of course, learned this from my international colleagues. I was on the board of GALA, the Globalization Localization Association, for 4 years, and I'm very active with ELIA, the European Language Industry Association, and the EU-ATC, the European Union Association of Translation Companies, because it is only this collaboration and this exchange of ideas that actually not only give us information, what's out there, where we're moving. And when we say we, I mean all stakeholders of this industry. And it is events like this that Primexus, put together that enable this this conversation, because to this fantastic audience here today. You don't have a few panelists sitting here, who have a script and talk about what they do. It really is for us to explore and hear what Vesna is doing. And through this exchange, again, it's not only the information you get, but even if you just open your mind, you are already much further ahead. So that's obviously we always looked, and to bring in technology or innovation in general takes courage. It takes investment, but it really takes courage. And we're a private, it is my company. I started it in the back of my bedroom with a laptop 20 years ago, right? You know, there was no seed funding. I guess I was a startup. That word wasn't used 20 years ago. And, but everything I'd done and all the parts, and that is come together in this business, right? So not, for example, of course, all my years at AUSIT, right? At the Australian Institute for Translators and Interpreters, where I was for many years the president in the chair in Queensland. And I also sat with Sam Berner when she was the national president. I was the vice president with her. But before that, I was the director of the Kimberley Aboriginal Interpreter Service in the Kimberley region for several years. Also, I brought this in, and we became the first commercial provider in Australia to provide Indigenous language interpreting for areas where there was NTAIS wasn't operating, or KISS, which I started and founded with the language center in Kununurra, wasn't there. So all of these things have influenced me, and all of this, and I still haven't obviously answered your question. You did want to say, want to know where our areas are in terms of verticals, industry areas. We have a specialty in resources, that is mining. We're well known in the mining industry as the prime language service provider. So this is mining, oil and gas, resources. We are also specialized in the defense industry and work with the defense industry on a daily basis. That is nationally, internationally. These are European tiers and primes, and it comes with a lot of benefits because you know, the data of our clients is very precious cargo. We are dealing with the IP of these companies because they give us to translate or to interpret, right? Their content, right? So we working with the Defense Department, you know, we're complying every day with the most stringent cybersecurity requirements there are. In order to, you know, to fulfill that compliance. And that is important not only for defense, for gone are the days where we want content on freelance translators' computers, you know? We also don't want content in a cloud on a server outside of Australia. Usually we have to have the content located in Australia. So the conversations have well and truly changed over the years. And today, what I am busy and passionate about in that case is really, it's really the IP protection, right? The data security, the risk management, the risk compliance. So there's many aspects, and that's a wonderful, wonderful part of our industry.
Excellent. And I have to say, technology does undergird everything, doesn't it? To a certain extent, especially with what's been happening with COVID, we have seen just this absolute uptake of technology, which has probably been good, because I think if we hadn't had something like that, we may not have stepped into that technology climb. Karine, could I ask just for you to introduce yourself? And I'm quite fascinated that you were with the World Health, I couldn't even say it, with WHO, within the Western Pacific. So.
Yes, thank you. Well, that's one part of my activities as a freelancer.
Yes,
I was part of the external pool of translators, so it would all be done, well, as a translator remotely anyway, but yes, and that was quite challenging, as you can imagine, with the times we're going through, especially at the beginning of this year when it was, we didn't really know, if you remember, in March, we didn't really know where all of this was going, and a lot of events got cancelled. For example, for me as a conference interpreter, we had scheduled many meetings and all got cancelled because everyone was waiting to see how it would unfold. So it's been, it's been a pleasure and you know, and even an honor to be able to be part of this pool of translators for WHO, for topics that, you know, touch us all. As you can see, healthcare is in the midst of everything, and that is what we need to put first. And I love that we have all this in Australia that is set, and this is at the front line of everything we do, keeping, you know, maintaining and keeping the health, protecting our population. This is one of our strengths.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Cool. Thank you so much. So again, it's so awesome to have all these amazing women. I have to say, there are two sort of main things that I was interested in with Vesna. It's the VRI, video remote interpreting, because I know New South Wales Health has had some success, or they've had great success there. And then once we've finished with that, we'll go into the RSI, which I keep thinking is not the wrist situation. It's not because I've got carpal tunnel or anything like that. It's remote stimulus interpreting. Cool. Okay, so Vesna, if I'm just hoping for you, and I believe also, just I'll just say now that Karine has been studying VRI as well.
Starting.
Yes, starting to study. Yes, so
I started
perhaps,
in June.
so we might have some university statistics and see whether how they weigh up with the actual person who's on the ground in the house. So Vesna, VRI.
Okay, so you know, no one was prepared for COVID.
Yeah.
So we started preparing video remote interpreting, luckily, prior to COVID.
Well done.
And so when COVID started, we were fairly ready for it. So prior to COVID, face-to-face interpreting was the gold standard. Over 90% of all of the work that we performed was on site, which meant that staff were travelling from one destination to another. If any of you have ever lived in Sydney or even visited Sydney, you will know what that means for us as interpreters, to have to travel, get into a car and travel across the city to get from one site to another. And as I said, so we were starting to implement video interpreting capabilities. With COVID in March, you know, we needed to fast track that. We were very lucky that, again, you know, being within the system, we had a lot of support from executive, from New South Wales Health and our ICT. So we were able to very quickly obtain the infrastructure that we required. So we, of course, you know, needed to get all of the cameras. We needed to get as many laptops as we could so we could perform mobile interpreting. We needed to ensure that our staff that were in high risk categories, that they could work from home.
Oh, yes.
So we started implementing all of the actual, you know, the infrastructure, so the technology. But one of the beautiful things that we did as a service, so this is where, you know, Sydney Healthcare Interpreter Service, we've been working with PEXIT as a platform. So now we're lucky enough across the state, we're all conversant with things like PEXIT, Microsoft Teams, Zoom, My Virtual Care. So we can work with a lot of different platforms. Our staff have been trained in our sessional interpreters, and you know, they're absolutely wonderful. So in terms of technology, I think they're ready for the next challenges that will come along. But what we managed to do within our own service was we implemented a URL. So we developed a URL that shortened the name that we use for our video. So we've got something that goes interpreter.video / and a booking number, which is very, very simple. So if we can't, as an example, email or SMS people or talk to people on the phone, we can talk to them on the phone and say, this is the URL. This is your booking number. So what happens in our service, once a booking comes through, our system, our Lang Manager system, will automatically generate a booking number. That booking number will then, we will generate that booking number will pre-configure our URL, and our system will automatically then email or SMS those details to the healthcare provider, to the interpreter, and to the patient if necessary. So it's a very quick and easy system, and all they need to do is they basically click on the link and they're in. So we've tried to make it as easy and as efficient as we possibly could. So that's what we're doing. So as I said to you earlier, we've conducted in the last financial year over 600,000 cases of service. Video interpreting now makes up around 4% of all of our bookings. Now this is a significant number for us, because when I say, you know, we really only started from March.
Yeah.
And this is again statewide I'm talking about. So this is a significant increase in a very, very short period. when you think about the number of overall of services that we do provide. The daily number is increasing rapidly, and that's because we have clinics and clinicians and services that are embracing the technology, and they are also now, getting a lot of the equipment themselves that they need. So, we are, New South Wales Health employs over 100,000 people. So, at one stage with COVID, we couldn't even get laptops because our laptop, and that wasn't just our problem, it was a worldwide problem because we needed to get them from China. And with COVID, so a lot of infrastructure, a lot of stuff, wasn't just getting through. So that was a problem that the whole world was having at that stage. Telephone interpreting makes up a very large number of our bookings at the moment. Even though face-to-face is, we're getting back to some sort of business as usual. But in terms of providing our appointments through video interpreting, I mean, what this means for us. It means that our unmet rates have dropped because we can provide more occasions of service because our interpreters aren't travelling. They're not wasting that time on the road. So we can provide more services. It also means that there's certainly been a cost benefit to us. And with no travel and no waiting time. What has normally happened before in clinics is, a clinic will be running late, the interpreter sits there and they wait. They've got a rather large initial waiting time in some instances. So now, we're cutting down on those things as well. The beauty of it is, as I said, because we're using various, platforms, our staff have become conversant in a whole number of new platforms, new technologies, and they're also embracing a whole lot of things that are about extra technology that will be coming their way. So yeah. I'm not sure if I've answered the question.
No, it's good. So there's two questions. One, there's actually three, and we're running it. So one is the quality assurance of interpreters. Two, so if you could, how do you manage the QA of the interpreters for doing video on the video platform? Do you sort of jump into some of? No, you wouldn't be able to do that because of privacy. But how do you ensure quality?
Okay, so how do we ensure quality? So first and foremost, we have provided a lot of training. We provide support, so we're still there on the phone for the interpreters if there are any issues. We have regular contact with interpreters after their bookings to see whether there were any difficulties. But we also have a lot of contact with our healthcare providers. We will have that regular communication. If there are any issues that we can troubleshoot straight away, or if there have been maybe some recommendations. I'll give you an example. With telephone interpreting, this has happened more so than with video. Where the sound quality has been poor. So where our interpreters are interpreting over the phone for, let's say, a family conference. So there's a whole number of parties. They're all speaking into a laptop as an example. So there's very poor quality. So the interpreter's not been able to hear very well in order to be able to interpret effectively. So we've then been able to go back and provide services with information on, the best or best practice in telephone interpreting.
That's good.
Provide them with recommendations for equipment that they could be using. That's going to help with the sound quality, with any outside interferences. So, I mean, from March, there has been, trial and error. But it's also opened up communication channels so that we've had that, even being able to communicate with our healthcare providers even more, and with our interpreters to make sure that we can troubleshoot any instances. So we've also developed quite a number of procedures for various parties, so for healthcare providers, for interpreters, as well as patients, on how to use the technology, how to troubleshoot the technology, and then of course what, in terms of interpreters, what their role is and how they need to, prepare. And, the normal stuff that we do with interpreters with our quality assurance.
I hear. So, Karine, you with studying, you did say you had some sort of statistics.
Yeah, well, I'm only starting my thesis. Yes,
Yeah.
absolutely. And it's about the usability of VRI in healthcare settings. So thank
Yep.
you, Vesna. And as Vesna has very rightly put it, you know, it's the pandemic that we are facing that we couldn't, of course, predict any of it, and to this scale, unprecedented. And so it only accelerated the development at a rapid pace of technologies that were already out there. We already had VRI, we already had RSI. These are remote interpreting methodologies, and telephone interpreting is just another one of them. And it started back in the early 70s. So once again, takes us back to this very prolific period of Australian history. But anyway, yes, I was quite intrigued by how we need to adapt and face all these challenges all at once, and also the impact on the, you know, on the community of interpreters who have to face those challenges, and how that they manage in terms of equipment, cost, and even on their own health as practitioners, because, you know, there is a health impact with the stress and the added pressure, etc.
Definitely.
So yes, and we've seen, I can give you just one of the numbers I've been able to obtain at this stage, but I'm just in the middle of my journey as a new researcher, as a junior researcher. But yes, in VRI, we've seen in some instances the previous appointments multiplied by 10 to 20 times the previous figures or the previous number of appointments, switching to VRI, because the thing with VRI compared to telephone interpreting, as Vesna has exposed, you can have, you know, some problems with the sound input. We all know that. But with VRI, the advantage of VRI on top of telephone is that you have the visual cues, and that really helps interpreters perform as best they can, because there is a lot of implicit meaning through those visual cues and the emotional cues, especially when a patient has to express something, you know, to express how they feel, for example. And I'll stop there, but yes.
Yeah, thank you. And I think you're exactly right. Just being able to see you guys makes it very different. Now, Tia, I was listening to a podcast that you were doing on Slater, and one of the things you talked about was the fact that our infrastructure wasn't there. And one of the things that Vesna's talked about a lot was putting the infrastructure in to enable the VRI. And if you could move that into RSI as well. So if it's a sort of the infrastructure is probably the topic there. And talk about RSI as well, please.
Sure. Actually, what I said was the market wasn't ready. Neither was the supply chain.
That's
right?
supply chain,
That's right. So we have been busy with video remote interpreting as well as RSI, remote simultaneous interpreting, for several years. But the market wasn't ready, and I want to make this really relevant because I know there's many practitioners listening, and I can see your questions as well. So this is for you, right? So the supply chain, which is the interpreters, and some of my best friends are, you know, conference simultaneous interpreters, because you asked now for RSI. We're not ready because they perceived remote simultaneous interpreting as a threat, right? It was perceived as the Jetstar of Qantas, or, you know, the EasyJet instead of the Air France, because we were not going to get the interpreters to the conference, right? They would stay at home, and the client gets a cheap product because they don't have to pay any per diem travel allowance, any traveling, and all of this. This was a little bit, you know, partly. And the other big threat was if interpreters from anywhere can log in from home, well, why would the client maybe not go to low-cost countries and get interpreters from there, right? Okay. So all valid thoughts. So the market on the other side wasn't ready either, right? Because they thought it was a big risk not to have the hardware. And anyway, COVID came, right? And we all had to leapfrog, right? We had to be what I like to talk about, anti-fragile, you know, as Nassim Taleb said, right? One of my, you know, favorite books was which means adversity makes you, you know, better. And okay, to our supply chain, to our interpreters, because I can see this picture, you know, how realistic is it really to make you know, to make a living and income of this? Because the infrastructure was there. The infrastructure is the internet and the platforms, right? And they've existed for a little while. What we didn't have during COVID, everybody scrambled to get these high quality headsets everywhere, right? But there are some technical requirements you need in order to do the RSI. And what does RSI mean? It means that the interpreter, very often, by the way, also the clients, they log in to those virtual, like here, but they would use another platform where they actually have a channel where they can choose, you know, the language. And yes, Zoom, by the way, also has an, you know, has an interpreting function. So there are different platforms. Some are more developed than others and have more features than others, trying to replicate the actual conference hardware of the interpreter console, where you have handover functions, you know, and all the functions, what you need when you are doing this extreme cognitive exercise of simultaneous interpreting, which at the best of time is already very demanding. Because you have to be obviously simultaneously interpreting, you have to know the subject matter, and now you're being asked to be at the same time also providing a technology provider and your own tech engineer, right? Yeah. So it's a, you know, quite an, but it's been fascinating. We have courageously invested in this, and with this, it's not like the client suddenly came raining from the clouds, right? Because they were also unsure first, how is this going to work? So you do a lot of demos, and the interpreters, we trained interpreters, we even bought microphones, those ones you see here, you know. Yeah,
I love it.
Or headsets, and sent them to interpreters, and helped. And it's not only us. I think I see Sebastian in the audience from Congress Rental. There's other providers. They've done a lot with webinars and awareness raising about RSI, which is very important. I really am conscious of time and conscious that we want to answer the questions of the audience. Miguel forwarded that question: how realistic and financially reliable is RSI as a source of income these days for Australia? Yeah, there are platforms, some, you know, offering it. As an interpreter, this is my, and Karine obviously, you know, will have recommendations as well, right? I mean, like us, like everyone, you have, you know, there's nothing is handed to anyone on a silver platter, right? You have to be courageous, you have to be open, right? And you have to try that. And we don't know with every step we take in life where it's going to take us. So there's no guarantees for nobody, also not here. But what you can do, remember what I said before, the threat, that if an interpreter from anywhere can suddenly interpret, and then those interpreters in the low-cost country, well, what about you here? The Australian-based interpreter, this is your chance. It opens up a whole new clientele for you all across the world. If we have, you know, there are organizations around the world who have to run events, and the events somewhere outside of Australia more than ever are all virtual because of COVID. There's nothing happening, right, physically. And events are at night, they're in the evening, which is our time, right? Yes, so you can be a night shift without charging, for example, for an urgency loading because, or sorry, for an after hours, because it is not after hours for you. There again, look at your value proposition. Look at where you actually have a competitive edge, right? And then into English is a very, from all the languages that might be presented here, is the very desirable combination everywhere around the world, right? So with you coming from an English, you know, native country, with the languages you have here in the audience, thinking about your regional advantage, thinking about your foreign currency advantage. The Australian dollar is quite competitive at the moment compared to the euro and the US dollars. Go through, do the exercise and think, what are my advantages here? What is my value proposition? Rethink maybe your cancellation clauses if you had some. I'm talking about conference interpreting where the cancellation clauses were very different to community interpreting, right? Because if you were booked for a day, you really could not book out for another conference. Now that you might be able to do 2 events a day because you might log in for 2.5 hours in the morning and for 2 hours in the afternoon. So you might, so think of all of this, and suddenly you have a value proposition that opens you up to language service providers, interpreting providers all over the world. So that's a very, so that's not a speculation, that's a fact. But it depends on you. I can't, just to finish your, looking at your question, I can't give you where the trend is going in languages, because of course it depends on the industries. We work in the public sector, of course, like everyone in the health sector, of course. But as I mentioned before, we also work in mining resources, which is largely Spanish, Latin American Spanish, Brazilian Portuguese, and some of the Asian languages. But that really depends on, where. But it really is, I really recommend, there is so much work in the virtual event space, because it's here to stay. But anyway, I've said enough, over to my colleagues here.
And I do think even there's a lot of these things are definitely here to stay. There's just no two ways about it. We do have a question here from Jackie. Is the NES, if the NES is remote, how do you guide the patient to actually access the video call link? So I think that might be for Vesna.
So the non-English speaking background client, I'm assuming, yeah. So the way that there are a number of ways that can happen. So in the early days, we were suggesting to health professionals that if they needed to, that we would interpret over the phone for them and the patient, so they could explain to the patient how they could get into the video, what they could expect, when the link will arrive, how it will arrive, with the email. So we felt that in the early days, that was the best way to explain that to patients, because people were very confused. Yeah. Not just patients, but healthcare providers and included. What we have done also on our end with the PEXIT system that we're using, we've also done some translations of very simple translation, basically a sentence or two, to say that people can just press on that link and enter. But that is all still very new. We would still prefer to have that conversation with them, and it's not us having it, it's us interpreting it.
Excellent, that's cool.
So that's what we're still doing, I think.
Okay. And there is another question, is the video interpreting service on demand?
At the moment it's pre-booked, but we can do pre-book, like say half an hour before an appointment.
Cool.
We don't do immediate or on demand as we do with telephone, because there is, you still need some time to set it up, find the right person to set up the equipment, ensure that the person's, at home or in a quiet, safe, private environment. So at the moment, but as I said, we need half an hour to do that with our service. Okay, cool.
And I might, Karen, I might just quickly jump in, because I did see that question as well.
Yeah.
And it is, we obviously Lingo, which is our interpreting unit, provides video remote interpreting and to hospitals, and courts across the country, and a lot here in Queensland. But we do on demand, indeed. And so it can be supported with some platforms like ours, and it is growing. So Vesna would know. I'm sure your developers, are working on that, because it is really and you might cover that later on, even though where the trends are going, because integration, obviously working with telehealth, is on demand is imperative. So that's why we're obviously providing this.
Yep.
We don't advertise on demand for video, only because we're not 100% certain we can always achieve it. As I said, as you saw, with the number of staff that we've got. So our service, we've got 49 staff interpreters, and we cover 2 enormous local health districts, 3 specialty networks, and do face-to-face as well as telephone and video. So rather than we don't have the capacity. However, as I said, in most cases we could do it very quickly, but we would rather people plan ahead and provide an opportunity to pre-book where possible. Yeah,
and we've got other, obviously Tia, definitely, I know you guys are able to do it, as well as other language service providers. Now there's another question here in regards to from Perth, what we might do is in our response, we'll also try and make sure there's an answer and some contacts. And I might talk to you, Vesna, about Emmanuel's question there in regards to the other contacts. Yeah, I don't know if you've seen that.
I'm going to suggest that you do send her my details.
Yes, I will. Yeah. There's another question about emergency patients, so we'll respond to that. There's a question there for you, Tia. How does TM offer on-demand video technically?
Yeah, we integrate. So our API. I mean, in terms of everything, what we do is API first technology, and this way we can integrate with telehealth platforms. Yeah.
The one thing I have found, and Vesna has sort of spoken about one of the technology providers in that space, is it does appear to be different in each state. And again, because I think it was a sudden emergence. So in Victoria, it's slightly different to New South Wales. It's slightly different in Queensland, with some commonality. So just from the health hospitals that we've seen. Okay, let's talk about emerging languages. And I'll just leave it open if anyone wants to. What do we see? And when we were practicing, I'm just going to step in. Tia used the word rare, and I'm trying to think, what is a rare language? In sort of my understanding, not being a professional interpreter or anything like that. Tia, would you like to just open up about rare and emerging languages?
Yeah, I was saying the term rare and emerging languages it doesn't mean that the language actually we sometimes refer to in our industry is rare. It means it was in the past, depending on the requirements in Australia, refugee streams, what's happening politically in the region, suddenly demands. We didn't have that much demand for Rohingyan, Karen and Rohingyan and Chinhaka. I remember over 25 years ago in Australia, we didn't talk about this, right? And in the beginning was a rare language. It is not a rare language, but rare and emerging came scarcity of language service practitioners in those languages. That's where it came from. And even languages like Nauruan, Tuvaluan, Bislama, Gilbertese from Kiribati, Solomon Pidgin, Tetum from East Timor, all these wonderful languages from Pacific Island languages we work with all the time. For some people rare, even though they're not rare. So rare is, you are right, it's quite a word, because like beauty is in the eye of the beholder, so is rare, right? What is rare for you and me is maybe not rare for other people.
Yeah, excellent. Vesna,
it is very geographical as well. So, we, unfortunately, and I remember saying, Tia's saying, working with all these beautiful, wonderful, Pacific Islander languages, I'm thinking we're desperate for them. We may not, and sometimes we've got some populations that aren't necessarily very large, and we may receive a request once in a blue moon, but, we need to still be able to provide even once in a blue moon. So, we've got our top 10 languages. We know which are the busiest languages, and we're well prepared for them, as Tia said, depending on, the population demographics, on, settlement of refugees or humanitarian entrants. So we have to follow all of that sort of data and work with organisations to try and be as prepared as we can if we know that there's going to be some sort of change or impact within our, within our environment. But some of those, we often talk about, well-established language groups compared to new emerging language groups in our area. But as Tia said, rare can mean all sorts of different things. For us at the moment, if I would talk about new emerging languages, and I would be mentioning things like, Rohingya and Swi and Yui and, Karine and Telugu and things like that. But then if I was to talk about rare, when I talk about rare, I'm talking about Latvian and Lithuanian and Dutch and Macedonian and Slovenian. These are well-established communities, but we don't have many interpreters in those language groups. And so we are very often desperate for some of these that I would term as being rare. But they're not, so there is the difference. You've got your well-established communities, you've got your new emerging languages, and then you've got your rare. And again, it depends on you know, what sort of definition you're using. Like Tia, I'm using the same definition as she is, I think.
Excellent. Cool. Karine, have you got anything to say in regards to this?
No, but as you know, I've lived for more than 30 years in New Caledonia, so in the South Pacific, and I love hearing about the Pacific Island languages and ways. And as we said, you know, it's linked to all the human dimensions, social developments. Yeah. When you have people from Kiribati, for example, they are threatened by climate change and the elevation of water level, of sea level. And so, you know, when these people will need to, we are considering displacing part of the Kiribati population to other parts, maybe Fiji. So there have been, you know, suggestions in that instance. And these people will still want to keep with their community, their language, their culture, their identity. Languages are part of the identity of a community. It's very important. Absolutely. And that, I think, is one other aspect that makes us passionate about it. Yeah. It's about protecting culture as well. Yeah. And we're here to help bridge those gaps and help people communicate.
Yeah, and we're Australia is quite diverse, but it can be, there's pockets, definitely pockets of areas, and it's quite different from New South Wales to Queensland to Victoria, Perth, etc. We're coming close to the end. Predictions, ladies, predictions, and we do have a lot of practitioners here. We do have quite a lot of health representatives. So moving forward, we definitely know that RSI, VRI, those technologies are definitely here to stay. But what are we feeling from the year that we've had? What are we feeling 2021 is looking like? Karine, do you want to go first?
Why not? So as you said in your introduction, there's no crystal ball. But while there is no crystal ball, what we can see, and maybe I'll talk about the training point of view and the future generations of interpreters. As Tia said, right, we all know that RSI is here to stay. And so this will need to be included in the didactics of the curricula of different university programs, training to the future generation of interpreters, because of course we will need to include those aspects to train to increase, everything the interpreters are facing in terms of development of technologies and how to work around, because there's a lot of protocols to put in place. There's a lot of knowledge on the interpreting task that needs to be explained and to develop and to take our students through. So this is where I see RSI staying. I don't think RSI will replace totally all the meetings out there, but we'll see.
Awesome. Tia?
Thank you. I was just reading one of the comments, by the way, here in the inbox, which was to interpreters to reassure that they will have no competition from overseas for a simple reason that all Australian service users request NAATI certified interpreters. That's a very good point, Gordana.
Yeah.
For VRI, there is no way that it can be supplemented with a crowd, from with an interpreting crowd from outside the public sector. Here is very clear on NAATI certification. And that's is strictly complied by everybody I know from the industry. So in terms of the public sector, that is indeed the case. Now, of course, in verticals, again, if the technical expertise of a French interpreter knowing about submarines, right, lies in France and not in Australia, your NAATI certification is not going to take you anywhere, Yep. So subject matter expertise is very important and is another big draw card in your value proposition just for the interpreters. And quickly to that crystal ball, well, look, I mean, agility and staying anti-fragile, as I said before, that is here to stay, right? And otherwise, as I said, API first. We talk about the platforms, and I've heard some of the questions. Please don't have too much anxiety about which platform, be it RSI, be it VRI. At the end of the day, they'll all become a little bit better because everybody's working on them. They'll all become really similar, like if you're using Outlook or whatever, you're using. yeah, try to relax about that, because it'll just be very natural for you.
Yep.
Because you will be really busy with that. And it will be platform agnostic, because the actual end client, I think, coming back to the health sector, I don't think they want to learn every provider's different platform, right? It's not what they want. It's not what hospitals want. They've got other things happening, you know. They will want a unified booking, you know, platform. And then we, the service providers, we can integrate and plug in,
Absolutely.
right? It is really, this is what we're really going to see. The integration, I saw some comments before of native integration. So develop it. And again, this is of course where the investment comes in, because it sounds so easy, but it's actually quite costly to do the development effort, you know. Nobody knows it better than Primexus, right? Because they're,
absolutely,
you know, clearly the experts here. But what my recommendation is, because this is also for a lot of the practitioners here, really, this is here to stay. So do carve out a little corner somewhere in your house if you don't have a little office, and just check that the lighting is good, right? And check that it is quiet, or you can make it quiet, right? As an interpreter, you might even buy one of those insulation pads and put it on the wall, right? And you've got your little corner. You don't have to have a full office where you know you're being quiet. It's very important. It'll become your space, and you will get one of those, right? And some headsets, and get used to it, you know, because this is here to stay. You will be interpreting, and you don't want that the new budding interpreters they will do that effortlessly, just like your kids effortlessly play with all these devices, right? So get in there. I turned 50 this year, right? Disclosure. And I learned. I didn't learn with all this technology. So what? I dived in there. So dive in there as well and be curious.
I love you said anti-fragile. I'm going to take that on. and we will go a little bit over, but these women are fascinating. So Vesna, would you like to close us out with your predictions for 2021?
Okay, I'm not going to spend a lot of time with this, and I do agree with both of my colleagues, but what I do see, so the demand for interpreters continues to grow.
Yes.
So I think this is a very, very positive sign, with a very bright future for interpreters. I think that this year has been a very difficult year, stressful year for everyone. But what interpreters have shown is they've shown their resilience, they've shown their positivity, they've shown their courage, and they've shown their willingness to step out of the box. So I personally see a very bright future ahead. And I think that whatever happens, we'll be able to deal with it without a problem.
I agree. And I have to say, we sort of get a different point of view, and we've seen that the adaptability, I think, from, because you guys are you're steering the ships a lot of the time, and we need management on board, we need governments on board, and it appears that they're hearing and they're listening, and you guys are at the forefront of giving them the information that they need to make the right decisions. So we appreciate everything that you guys do. We got one, no, it's not, what was this? I shall take on being, anti-fragile. Well done. Yes, I think that will be the word of the day, anti-fragile. And Gordana, that was exactly, Tia picked up on your point there. Thank you for that. I'm not sure whether we can put in some of the chat when we send it out to you, but I'm going to include your comments there, because I think they're about the advantages of the NAATI certified interpreters. I want to thank you guys so much. It has been absolutely fascinating, and we're going to send bios and information where you can follow these ladies on LinkedIn. I think Tia is speaking every second day somewhere. so she does podcasts. Just one other thing, just resources. I know we're over time, but resources, where do you ladies go for resources or to keep up to date?
Okay, so everywhere and anywhere. So from OSIT to NAATI to research to journals, internationally as well as nationally. And of course, my colleagues in health, so in the other healthcare interpreter services.
Awesome.
And colleagues, far and wide.
Excellent. Yes, I think you are a great network, Tia.
The partner organizations of ALC, which is the Australasian Association of Language Companies, are a really good resource. That is GALA, the Globalization Localization Association, has a fantastic library, is my go-to absolute, but also ALEA, the European Language Industry Association for the international bit, and of course NATI here in the ALC.
Excellent. Karine?
They've all been told by my two colleagues, so I have nothing to add except that I follow everyone and every newsletter I can subscribe to any of these organizations. I will, so there's lots of reading, but during my leisure time, but I love it, so yes, it's not a problem.
Awesome. They're great references, and we've come across Slater and NIMSY, very, very good resourceful information there. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending. I hope you've really enjoyed it. We're going to do more of these because I love them. And I get to talk to people like this, which is absolutely fantastic. We know you've given a lot of time into this, so I really, really appreciate it. And again, I hope everybody gets some great value out of it. And thank you. And we'll see you all later. Thanks, ladies.
Thank you for having us. Thank you.
Cheers.
Thank you very much, Karen.
Thanks, Miguel.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.